Good morning and welcome. As you can see, I'm sitting down here where you can see my face and I can talk to you. Those of you that are joining us online here, and hope this will provide a little bit better setting and you'll get probably tired of looking at the back of my head. As we continue Pastor Don's series Shift, we move to 1 Corinthians chapter 13 this morning. And before I get into that, I want to ask you a question. Uh, what words would you use to describe uh, our society today?
Me-centered.
Me-centered,
Unstable.
unstable,
Polarized.
polarized,
Broken.
broken. All good words. Keep those all in mind as we get down here and we start talking about what Paul's written here later on. Corinth was an ancient city in Greece. It had been destroyed and was rebuilt by Julius Caesar. And that was the city that was there at the time that Paul did his ministry in the city. The city is located on an isthmus of land. If you look at a map, you'll see that Greece comes down and it necks in, and there's this 4 mile stretch of land that runs across here, and then it opens back up. And this created a funnel that if you were traveling north-south, you had to go through Corinth. That was the only way you could get from here down here, and if you were down here, that was the only way you could get up here. If you were taking a sea voyage or you were shipping by a ship, you could go straight across here and unload the ship and carry the cargo across and put it on another ship. Or the smaller ship, you could come here and you could hire enough slave labor to pull your ship out, and using logs as rollers, roll the ship down this 4 miles and put it back in the water and continue your journey on. Both methods were used. The alternative was a 230-some mile treacherous journey around the southern tip of Greece. So this created an atmosphere that there were all kinds of different people located in Corinth. You name it, it was there. They had educated people, they had uneducated people. They had slaves, they had different races of people, different levels of education, and all this created a very diverse population. Now, the words that you just used to describe our society today, those words would have been applicable to the city of Corinth at the time of Paul. One word that I would add to that is individualism, self-centered, maybe is a better word, which is very prevalent in our society today, rather than being community-oriented. There was a saying at the time of Paul that it was a derogatory comment that you could make about somebody, is to refer to them as living like a Corinthian. And this indicated two particular things about the individual, that they were a drunkard and they were immoral. Barclay uses the word immoral debauchery to describe them. The temple of Aphrodite was located above the city. There were 1,000 sacred prostitutes attached to the temple, and it said at night that the prostitutes would come down into the city to work and then go back up to the temple during the daytime. I didn't find this in any of the commentaries or any of the descriptions about Corinth, but it poses the question in my mind is, were the prostitutes and their work in the city, was that a means of support for the temple? I don't know. That's just a question that popped into my mind, and I couldn't find an answer to it. But it seems like there's a logical connection there. Um, Paul was in Corinth for 18 months. It was one of his longer tenures of ministry in one place. Their scholars have been dissecting First and Second Corinthians and trying to sort it out. They think there's evidence that there were as many as five letters that were written by Paul. We only have two. Um, some scholars say that Second Corinthians is a compilation of two different letters. Um, but they find evidence in breaking it down that are as many as five letters, some of which we don't have today, that Paul wrote. But there's also evidence that they find in dissecting his writing that Paul returned to Corinth at some point in time and to deal with the issues that were dividing the church, the problems the church was having in Corinth at that time. I talked about individualism, and division was another word that was mentioned to divide about the people. Well, the church was no different. The body of Christ that existed in Corinth was a divided body. You may recall that Paul writes that saying that describing the different factions, and the factions that he described were himself, a group of followers of himself, which he did not particularly care to be identified as having a group of followers to himself, but they were characterized by salvation by faith alone. Then there was another group. You recall that Paul called out a group of people who followed Apollos. And those that followed Apollos were the intellectual people. They looked at faith through an intellectual, a mind rather than a heart approach to their faith. And then there was a group aligned behind Peter. And this group, even though Peter doesn't have, there's no record that he had anything to do with the church at Corinth, that those aligned with Peter was strictly because of his status as an apostle of Christ, that he was there with Christ in Christ's ministry. And then the fourth group, and this is a group that Paul himself would have aligned himself with, is that being led by Christ and by the Spirit. So these are four distinct groups that were within this church, where people were in disagreement. And sometimes, as you read Paul's writing to the church, it's not too far-fetched to think that there probably were some physical altercations between these groups. But the overriding thing that Paul is addressing here is that with all of this division within the city, within the church, the work of the church is not being addressed. The image that's being projected into the community is not an image that will attract people and point them to Christ. It may attract them in just to be part of the group, but it doesn't attract them to and point them to Christ. Now, it's against this backdrop that Paul writes these letters addressing these situations. Corinthians 1:13 is called the love chapter. And where do you hear it most often? Weddings. Well, that was the furthest thing from Paul's mind when he wrote this. And I think Paul would be somewhat amused, maybe even a little bit annoyed that we use this, what he has written, in that way. What he wrote was to these divided Christians and trying to have them see that they need to address each other with some respect, and above all, they need to address and relate to each other through love. The 13th chapter describes how they're to go about that. And so I want to read that for you now from the Common English Bible. He begins, if I speak in tongues of human beings and of angels, but I don't have love, I am a clanging gong or a clashing cymbal. The image here in this first verse is speaking in tongues, which was dividing the congregation. And Paul addresses that in his letters, that that's not something that people should seek out. The clanging gong or clashing cymbal is a direct reference to pagan worship, Baal worship that took place. And so you have that contrast there. If I had the gift of prophecy and I know all the mysteries and everything else, and if I have such complete faith that I can move mountains, but I don't have love, I'm nothing. If I give away everything that I have and hand over my own body to feel good about what I've done, but I don't have love, I receive no benefit whatsoever. Love is patient, love is kind, it isn't jealous, it doesn't brag, it isn't arrogant, it isn't rude, it doesn't seek its own advantage, it isn't irritable, it doesn't keep a record of complaints, it isn't happy with injustice, but it is happy with truth. Love puts up with all things, trusts in all things, hopes for all things, endures all things. Love never fails. As for prophecies, they will be brought to an end. As for tongues, they will stop. As for knowledge, it will be brought to an end. We know in part and we prophesy in part, but when the perfect comes, what is partial will be brought to an end. When I was a child, I used to speak like a child, reason like a child, think like a child. But now that I have become a man, I put an end to childish things. Now we see a reflection in a mirror. Then we will see face to face. Now I know partially, but then I will know completely in the same way that I have been completely known. Now faith, hope, and love remain. These three things, and the greatest of these is love. When I was working at Xerox, one of my coworkers died suddenly and unexpectedly. And when I went to his funeral, one of his sons took this middle part of 1 Corinthians, where it says, love is patient, love is kind. And instead of love, he substituted his father's name in there and read that because that was the way that he thought of his father. That's just kind of always stayed with me when I read this. I remember Ken and his son there. What are some thoughts that are running through your head?
When you're talking about the clashing cymbals and ringing bells and all, well, back then, people who thought themselves so important, that's what they used to announce themselves walking down the street. To let people know, I'm on my way, I'm coming. Even kings did it to draw attention to themselves.
Especially
So
them.
Paul is kind of slapping the people and say, hey, don't be like somebody you think you're so important that you gotta use outside things to announce that you're coming. Well, today we do the same thing. They got horns on the car. You think you're important, you make a horn sound to let people know you're coming, or don't get in my way, move back over into your lane. It's supposed to be a safety feature, but to me, it reminds me back in biblical times. It's a carryover. We have a horn on our car. We can announce our coming before you even get there. They know. And they have ambulances with the sirens. They announce coming up behind you before you can even see them in the mirror. And it's the same thing. It's a carryover. And they are important. That's one good thing about it is they are really important. We had to pull over yesterday because a fire truck over near Rocky Mountain was coming down 220. Well, 2 lanes of traffic stopped at the stoplight. Then Boone's Mill, so everybody was trying to move over to the right to the sidewalk and let the fire truck go through the stoplight. And we were the second one in line, so we were trying to ease over a little bit, but he got in the left-hand lane that would turn left and to go around through the intersection to keep going his way. But that is required in something like that. But back then, it was for people who thought they were so important that they had to put people up in front of them clanging bells and cymbals to get out of my way. I'm coming through.
Well, yeah, and I was thinking as you were talking there, using it to draw attention to yourself.
Mhm. They thought they were that important. They had to be drawn attention to.
There's a counterpoint to that exists today that many times horn is used to express your anger at somebody with road rage.
They take it too far.
Yeah.
Announcing and doing something about it is 2 different things. But like you were talking about earlier, so many different factions in the church, they each thought they were so important. Well, another thing in that, but all the churches have different, members have different jobs. So he's saying, don't be against each other, work together, because you might be the conscience of this other group. And that other group is the conscience of another group. So y'all kind of keep yourself in balance by checks and balances of questioning some of your actions when you think you're in the right all the way, when actually you may not be. It's like one of Lee Doman's songs about the guy going to heaven, and it's Democrats, Republicans, prostitutes, everybody there, and it's not, it's everybody has a chance of getting there at the end.
Let me pose a question in a different vein there. In your experience in church today, be our congregation or other congregations that you've been at, what's your experience in being loved?
Well, when we were having churches, when you were preaching, they always accepted us. It was unbelievable to me that there were never any hateful people well, they might have been hateful to other people, but they weren't to us.
When our district superintendent, Ken Jackson at the time, when he appointed me to my first appointment, which was to Big Island and Cove, and he told me, he said, there are 2 things that I want you to do. He said, I want you to go up there and love those people. And the second thing that he told me, I wasn't prepared for. He said, I want you to let them love you. And as Jenny says, we were loved. And that was something that I had not given any thought to prior to going into the ministry, is that the pastor can experience and needs to experience the love of the congregation. But you have to let them do it. And a lot of pastors keep a fence around them that doesn't allow that to happen.
But they need mentors and comforters also.
Yeah.
What I was thinking about a while ago, I had put this in my wallet years ago. It's a little thing that was written, Authors Unknown. It's talking about making heaven. It said, I was shocked, confused, bewildered as I entered heaven's door. Not by the beauty of it all, by the lights or its decor, but it was folks in heaven who made me sputter and gasp. The thieves, the liars, the sinners, the alcoholics, the trash. There stood the kid from 7th grade who swiped my lunch money twice. Next to him was my old neighbor who never said anything nice. Herb, who I always thought was rotting away in hell, was sitting pretty on cloud 9, looking incredibly well. I nudged the angel. What's the deal? I would love to hear your take. How'd all these sinners get up here? God must have made a mistake. And why is everybody so quiet, so somber? Give me a clue. Hush, child, said he. They're all in shock. No one thought they'd see you. I've had this for years, and I was cleaning my wallet the other day looking for something, and I found it. I thought it got kind of fit back together. You never know.
It also fits with the way Lee Doman ends his chorus
Right,
in that song. And even me.
right, and even me.
If you don't make it, there's no chance for the rest of us.
No, it's by the grace of God, not by what you do.
Yeah, but I think you'll make it.
Well, we stop and contemplate this chapter of love. There's much to chew on there and to digest. And later on this morning, we'll see what Pastor Dawn does with it in the sermon. For those of you that have been with us online, hope this has been inspirational and look forward to you joining us in worship in a little while this morning. So thank you and God bless.